لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله. لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
And today what I'm going to do is focus in on the origins of Shirk. Today we're going to focus in on the origins of Shirk. How did Shirk begin? And this is something very important for us to know. How did Shirk come about? What is it that makes human beings worship idols? What is it that makes human beings want to associate partners with Allah? How did this originate? This is what we're going to discuss today. Allah tells us in the interpretation, the meaning, mankind was one nation. And then Allah sent prophets as bringers of good news and warnings. Okay, so Allah tells us here that in the beginning of the creation of humans, we were all one nation. All one nation of people. And then Allah sent prophets to us. Okay? And one of the companions, whose name was Ibn Abbas, he said between Prophet Noah and Prophet Adam, there were 10 generations. And all of these generations were upon the truth. And then they differed. So when they differed is when Allah sent prophets as warners to call them back to the truth. So we learn from this, from Ibn Abbas, that there were 2 generations between Adam and Noah. The people used to worship Allah and His oneness. It wasn't until the generation of Prophet Noah that the people began to ascribe partners with Allah. And this is something very important to remember. And another one of the early scholars, Ibn al-Hanbali, he states that this saying here refutes the historians from the people of the book who like to go around claiming that the sons of Adam were fire worshippers. So this is not correct, guys. Cain and Abel did not worship fire. Cain and Abel did not worship the fire. They were not fire worshippers. The first 10 generations of human beings were all upon the truth. They worshipped Allah alone. It wasn't until after the 10th generation that they began to deviate away from that truth. Okay? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has told us too. He said that Allah said, I created all my servants upon the true religion, which is worshiping Him alone. Then the devils came to them and led the people astray from their true religion. The devils were the ones that made lawful to the people that which I had made unlawful for them. And the devils were the ones that commanded the people to associate and worship with me, that which I'd sit down no authority. So thus we see from this authentic hadith right here that even the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam confirms the reality that Allah created us all in the beginning of the creation of man. Man worshipped Allah alone. He worshipped Allah alone. It was not until the 10th generation of human beings that they began to deviate away from that, and it was the shaitan that made the people associate partners. Also, another proof that we were not born to worship idols, we were not born to associate partners, is the fact that our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam also tells us in another authentic hadith that every child is born upon the fitrah. What does this mean? When we say every child is born upon the fitrah, this means every child is born innocent in belief of Allah. And also Allah tells us Himself in the interpretation, the meaning, Allah's fitra, with which He created mankind, there is to be no change to the religion of Allah. So Allah tells us Himself that He created all of us upon the truth. So we were not born pagans, guys. We were not born a creation looking for something to worship. We were born already in the natural state of belief, in submission to Allah. It's our parents, that determine whether or not we keep that belief. If your parents are not Muslims, if your parents are unbelievers, then this will determine whether or not you keep your belief. Okay? So that brings us to a question that many Muslims ask. Well, how did this associating partners with Allah begin? If, as human beings, we were naturally created to worship Allah, then how is it that we end up worshiping other things? And what is it that led mankind to commit shirk? If the original humans, the first 10 generations of humans were worshiping Allah alone, then what happened to make them deviate away from that? Well, Allah tells us what happened in the Quran. Allah tells us in the interpretation, the meaning. The people of Noah, they said, you shall not forsake your gods, nor shall you forsake Wad or Su'a or Yagut, nor Ya'uq or Nasir. So Allah is telling us in that verse about how Noah alayhi salam went to his people and tried to call them away from worshiping the 5 idols that they were worshiping. And the early companions, they give us an explanation of that verse. They say that these 5 gods were originally righteous people. However, when these people died, the shaitan came to the people and whispered into their hearts to worship these 5 men. And then shaitan went to those who came after them and continued on with his whisperings. But these 5 gods that the people were worshiping were 5 people who were good believers, who were good Muslims. But when they died, the shaitan went to the people and convinced them to commit shirk with them. Okay, for example, Wad, he was a Muslim man who was loved by the people. When he died, the people began to gather around his grave in the land of Babylon, lamenting and mourning over his death. And when Shaitan saw the people mourning and grieving over this man's death, Shaitan took the form of a man, and he went to the people and told them, I see that you are mourning and lamenting, so why don't you make a picture of him? Make a picture of this man, a statue of him. And that way you will always remember him. So the people listened to Shaitan, and they made a statue of this man, and they put it up over his grave. And this way they always remembered him. Okay? And when Iblis saw this, he came back to the people again. And he said, why don't you make everyone amongst you have a statue like this in their house? So that way we can constantly remember this man. So the people said yes. So everyone built a statue of this dead man and put him in their house so they could constantly be reminded of him. And that is how shirk began. So that is how shirk began, guys. It began with people lamenting and grieving over a righteous man when he died, and to the point where they built a statue to commemorate him. And then they began to pray to that statue. People began to come from all over just to make homage to this statue, this man's grave and this statue. They began to talk to the statue. They began to ask the statue to do things for them. And so that is how Shirk began.